Welcome to the Many Adventures of Peter and Fee, Volume 1, Homecoming, by Kelvin Fernandez. Peter and Fee has budding communities across Reddit, Discord, Goodreads, Twitter, Facebook, and more, so I encourage you to seek out your comfort zone, join the conversation, and let me know what you thought of each chapter as you get through them. Since the series has just begun, the communities are small, so there's a good chance I will personally respond and we can have a discussion. I hope you enjoy listening to the adventures just as much as I enjoyed creating them. So without further ado, let's start the journey. The Many Adventures of Peter and Fee. Volume 1, Homecoming. Chapter 2, Blackmail and Blackmail. Ready, set, go! Peter raised the mug over his head and chugged furiously. Sitting at the end of the bar, he was last in line of 6 men, all draining their beers as fast as they could. The barmaid waved her hands enthusiastically, cheering the men on, her sheer stockings clearly visible under the glass counter. Her big brown eyes and low-cut top were the main reason such a crowd had gathered. Peter tilted his neck further back, the last dregs flowing down his throat. Slam! The man 3 seats down smashed his glass hard on the counter, roaring in victory. The barmaid let out a shriek of glee and practically vaulted over the counter to plant a kiss on his cheek, as the other men hurried to sweep the broken glass away from her. Peter looked enviously down the table, before sadly placing his own mug on the counter. Fee sipped her orange juice in the stool beside him, 100 sarcastic comments battling for her attention. She instead took pity on her downtrodden friend, saying, "You don't want a kiss from her anyway. You might catch something." "Might be worth it," Peter said softly to himself, still staring at the barmaid sitting on the counter, giggling as she stroked the winner's large arms. "One more round, you reckon?" "I think you've had enough," Fee replied coolly. "Aren't we supposed to be at the docks at 1? Peter raised a finger and recited, "Captain Mathers never makes a deal, unless each man has had a drink for himself and his partner. And that goes double for friends." As if a notorious smuggler needs an excuse to get drunk at noon in the middle of the week. Fee shook her head. Staring through his empty mug, Peter struggled with the decision. His face had grown hot after his 3rd beer, and he already bemoaned the idea of making their way to the docks under the blistering sun. He decided he might as well make it an even 4, and enjoy the cool shade of the tavern a while longer. It was then, however, that his rapid pace caught up with him, and he couldn't contain a long, low burp escaping from his mouth. A few men chortled in their seats as the barmaid shot him a look of disdain. Peter slouched. "That's nothing," Fee smiled. She drained her glass before letting out a mighty belch of her own, causing the entire bar to fall silent and turn in admiration. The barmaid pursed her lips at the audacity of this little girl, as everyone else burst into laughter. Fee stood up on the stool and mock curtsied to great applause. The barmaid was furious her attention had been stolen, and started their way. Noticing this, Peter hurriedly dug a few copper pennies out of his pocket and threw them onto the counter, before grabbing Fee and hurrying out the door. The scolding tone of the barmaid could just be made out as the door swung shut behind them. Peter led Fee away from the rickety tavern, its bronze bells and orange glass windows inviting guests to the comfort within. A sign hung above the doorway read, "Shanty Shackle," as it rustled in the slight breeze. "Well, that's the last of our coin." Peter turned out an empty pocket as he raised an arm to shield himself from the sun. "Hood," he commanded. "Oh, come on. No one in there seemed to mind," Fee complained. "Hood," Peter repeated. "Oh, fine then." Fee scowled as she grabbed her hood and yanked it up over her head. Her long ears folded back under the fabric, disappearing from view. "But if it seems as if I can't hear, don't be fooled. I'm just ignoring you." They walked down the cobblestone street as men and women bustled by. The port city of Croton was alive with the cries of merchants selling their wares. Busy housewives squabbled over the price of bread and cheese as burly husbands carried large wooden crates down to the wharf before the trade ships set out at night. Fee marveled at the raucous din of the harbor front, as 100 voices battled through the air, with every cry managing to reach its target. Through all the commotion, the crisp smell of the sea permeated across the city. The largest trade city in the west, Croton was established by the previous king of Meridel as the official passageway to the eastern continent, Perona. The vast sea separating the landmasses made trade between the two continents difficult. The raging wars spanning centuries made it impossible. It was not until the end of the last Mage War that King Tritus established the city of Croton as a monument to peace. Located along Meridol's eastern coast, the port city sat at the edge of the Strait of Corus, the shortest point between the continents. Since its inception, trade flourished, utterly transforming the landscapes of the two kingdoms. Cultures flooded into opposing lands, coloring the city with foreign charm, a fanciful distraction from the slaughter that plagued the world beforehand. Soldiers laid down their weapons and converted to sailors. An entire worldwide trade industry sprung up practically overnight. An economy of war replaced by one of commodities, just as profitable, if not more so. Peter and Fee passed by one last stubborn vendor as he pushed a pearl-string necklace into their faces. Peter shamelessly pointed to his empty, turned-out pocket in response. The storefronts and market stalls had given way to large warehouses, with ships docked in the harbor, waiting patiently to be loaded. The commotion of the marketplace was matched by the hectic clamor of the shipping harbor. Unlike the ruckus of the market, the harbor was unexpectedly organized, although just as boisterous. Men pushed heavy wagons back and forth, loading and offloading the hundreds of ships in the dock. Each man strode with purpose, crisscrossing through the swarm of sailors at a quick pace, cussing out anyone in their way. Their wagons buckled and swerved, threatening to barrel out of control, yet always reaching their destinations. All the while, the barks of the captains thundered over their crews.
"Be careful with that tree bear, son. The Twilight Troop won't pay a cent if she comes in damaged. That wine is worth more than your life. I'll have your tongue if I find you've taken so much as a whiff of it. Cadmus is not going to be happy. This snake oil order was due in last week. Now what use will he have for it?"
One captain wore 3 hats stacked atop each other, as he himself loaded crates of garments onto his broad oak vessel. Another held whip in hand, threatening his forlorn crew as they hurriedly failed to patch a large gash in the hull of their frigate. A small bearded man stood at his pier, screeching orders at his workers as they rolled barrels of oaken mead down the dock. Each ship holding merely 2 barrels, the small man stood proudly over his veritable grand fleet of dinghies, ready to set sail. This here was Plan A. Peter gestured as they made their way along the dock. Fee followed his finger, but realized immediately which ship he meant. A grand passenger liner stood perpendicular outside the wharf, occupying the length of 3 piers. Its large canvas sails hung tied to their masts, eager to burst out. The wide cedar deck featured beautifully railed staircases, leading both up to the helm with its adorned steering wheel, and down below deck to the many cabins awaiting guests. Men and women lined the piers in anticipation of boarding, as clean sailors clad all in white checked their tickets. A little girl in her father's arms pointed excitedly at the gold lettering emblazoned across the hull. The Lucky Pier. And this, Peter extended both arms in splendor, is our backup plan. Fee squinted. This time, it wasn't apparent what ship Peter was referring to. In fact, she figured he was mocking her and ready to quip back when she saw it. Hidden in the shadows of the Lucky Pier, a little caravel lay docked aside the adjacent pier. Painted black from bow to stern, the ship was fitted with 10 sets of oars, a chipped rudder, and not much else. Even the unfurled sails, catching the breeze and causing the caravel to sway dangerously, were black as the night. Haphazardly painted across the hull, faded letters told its name, but only an S, 2 C's, and a W remained to give clue as to what it could be. The only color, if you could call it that, was the symbol painted on the black flag atop the mast. A white crow swooped down indefinitely over any sailors that were found on deck. Today, however, there were none. "You're kidding, right?" Fee asked as Peter just stood there, arms still raised. "You're kidding, right?" "Fee, I know it's not much to look at, and he's shady as hell on top of it, but Captain Mathers and I go way back, and without any money, I don't know what other choice we have." Crouching down and putting his hands on her shoulders, he continued. "He's a reasonable man, if not quite an honest one. I'm sure he'll give us safe passage after all we've been through. I just need you to go wait on that bench, and after I have a quick word with him, it'll be smooth sail." "I'm not coming," Fee interrupted, taken aback. "It's just, it'd be best if you didn't, I think." "Based on what?" Fee raised her voice. Mathers is temperamental. His behavior is volatile. I can't risk you having an outburst and ruining everything, okay? I'll be quiet. This is important to me too. I'm not gonna mess it up. Peter sighed. Listen, Mathers is a smuggler. He deals with all manner of illegal goods and nefarious criminals. Fee opened her mouth to argue, but Peter stood up and placed a hand on her head. Please, it's safer if I go alone. Fee stared at the floor, defeated. The warm pressure of Peter's palm pressed down against her hood. Without a word, she marched away from the pier and planted herself on a bench overlooking the sea. Head down, arms crossed, she refused to show Peter how upset she was. Instead, she opted to sniff back her sadness and stick her tongue out at him. Peter smiled and made his way down the pier. His cloak billowed in the open air as he ascended the gangplank onto the deck of Captain Mathers' ship. The ship's railing was chipping paint, and the deserted deck was coated in a layer of grime. Peter grimaced at the sound of his shoes squelching against the deck as he made his way to the captain's quarters. A sole pinpoint of light poked its way through the glass pane of the door situated below the helm. With a rapt knock, Peter waited outside the door. A gruff groan was his only response. He took one last look towards the overbearing sun before he made his way deeper into the dreary vessel. Closing the door behind him, all signs of the brilliant day outside vanished. Dust particles drifted lazily about the dimly lit room. The only light came from the thin ray of sun stretching through the doorpane, and an ornate lantern sitting on the captain's desk. The desk held a flurry of papers strewn about, along with 2 shot glasses and a half-empty bottle of whiskey. Behind the desk, tilting back in his chair with a pipe smoking in his mouth, sat Captain Mathers. Mathers was a middle-aged man, whose gaunt face was stained by the effects of soot and tar. His mustache seemed to elevate off his face, while still remaining ingrained within his cleanly trimmed beard. He wore brown spackled trousers and a navy raincoat which failed horribly at covering his protruding gut. His high-buckled boots rested atop his desk, allowing him to sit at a precarious angle. He took a break between puffs to inspect his guest, and brought his chair down with a clack at the sight of Peter. Without a word, the man hastily poured out 2 tots into the awaiting glasses, and rose to hand him one. Pulling himself close, Mathers took a whiff. Satisfied it wouldn't be either of their first drinks, the captain clinked his glass to Peter's, and the 2 men drained their shots.
Well, I'll be damned. The bubbling boy returns to my humble abode. The balls on you would be worth a fine sum, if anyone would believe they're real.
Mathers' chipper tone could not hide the distaste in his words. He poured a second round and shoved the glass into Peter's hand.
I'm sure you don't mind, but that be Burr's glass you're using. It'd be a shame to have to wash it twice, you know.
Peter's throat still burned from the first, yet down the second all the same. Holding back a grimace, he set the glass down and went to take his seat at the desk. Hidden from his view at the door, Peter now saw someone passed out on a mouldy couch in the corner behind him, a pirate's cap draped over their face.
As you can see, you've arrived just in time to take Burr's place,
Mathers chuckled, returning to his seat.
My, you've grown. How old have you gotten now? Must be what, 19 already?
20, Peter corrected.
20? Has it been that long since you stabbed me in the ass?
Peter tapped his fingers against his leg, painfully aware his mind was muddling. Closing his eyes, he began pooling liquid to his fingertips, concentrating on the technique in order to calm his nerves. He suddenly became very aware of the slow rocking of the ship. Things were already going poorly. Captain Mathers, I've come to ask a favor, Peter began. I need passage for 2 to Perona.
Straight to the point, and honest like a knife to the face.
Mathers laughed heartily.
That's what I liked about you, Pete. No bullshit. Just brazenly asking for help, not even worried that I plan to slit your throat where you sit.
I take it you haven't found it in your heart to forgive me then, eh? Peter smiled sheepishly.
Forgive?
Mathers roared, banging his fist on the table.
I take you in as one of mine. I clothe you. I feed you. I take you across the sea and back, and for what? To find an empty bunk on the night of our biggest job yet? A contract you yourself brought to me assuring you could get it done.
I told you it would be only temporary. I was looking to get out for a while, Mathers, but you kept pulling me in further. Peter found he too was raising his voice.
And why not? A major on my crew, you were worth your pitiful weight in gold.
Exactly. You were ready to sell me off as soon as you got the chance.
Who wouldn't? Instead, the job you planned was an utter farce. I had to renege on a deal and watch stupidly as the name of Captain Mathers got dragged through the mud.
The captain stood abruptly, breathing hard.
Never had I thought you'd stroll my way again. I had spat your name to the winds and let it take my grudge with it.
His hand reached into his desk drawer, and he pulled out a curved knife.
But the wind is a fickle beast. It brought word you wanted to meet, and returned my fury greater than ever before. You're a smart boy, Pete. You knew this could only go one way.
Peter remained in his chair. I am smart, Mathers. I understand, like the wind, the grudge of a smuggler, however strong, can be swayed. He slowly reached a hand into his top right pocket without taking his eyes off the captain. Fidgeting around, he found the hole in the corner and thrust his arm deep into the inner lining of his cloak. He squirmed for a moment, contorting foolishly in his chair, before his hand wrapped around his prize. Carefully, under Mathers's wary gaze, he extricated his arm and placed on the desk a silver bird with dazzling eyes. The captain was enthralled. Dropping the knife, he quickly scooped the bird up, examining it from every angle.
That real silver?
Yep.
And the eyes?
Diamonds. You see how I couldn't quite trade it in for cruise tickets. So naturally, I thought of you. Mathers grinned from ear to ear. All thoughts of murder dashed from his mind. Appeased? Peter asked.
Aye, boy. We'll let bygones go, as it were.
The door rattled as Mathers's rage was carried away once again. Excellent. Now about that passage, Peter began, thinking things were finally going to work out.
No,
Mathers said flatly, pocketing the bird in the process.
No?
Peter repeated blankly.
No,
Mathers confirmed.
This makes us even by my account, and Captain Mathers can only exchange favors for favors.
Peter groaned. The room began to spin just as he thought he had made it through. What do you want? A calloused hand grabbed his shoulder, causing Peter to jump in fright. He looked up to find a large woman with thick braids in her hair staring down at him. Captain Mathers returned to his chair, tilting back in his seat.
Baruka, dear, please tell my friend here how he can be of service.
Fee swung her legs aimlessly, waiting on the bench in the hot sun. Why doesn't he trust me? She thought, staring at the silent ship rocking in the waves. I trust him. I mean, I don't really have a choice, but still. She touched her locket through her shirt, taking comfort in its shape. They had only been traveling together for a few months now, but it had been the two of them alone the entire way. He is helping me, Fee conceded. Maybe I'm making too big a deal of it. Why do I even want to sit in a stuffy meeting? The shriek of a young girl brought her out of her reverie. Turning around and kneeling to peer over the bench, Fee stared through the sea of workers lugging their goods about. Shifting her eyes, she couldn't locate the source of the cry through the crowd. Closing them, she focused on her ears. Drowning out the ambling men, she tried to pick out the voice, all the while cursing her infernal hood. She snapped her head to the left, just in time to notice two boys dragging a little girl into an alley between two warehouses. Fee briefly hesitated at the thought of Peter, but only briefly. She vaulted over the bench and sprinted through the busy wharf. Stepping lightly, she threaded her way through the men, hopping over a cart on her way. Pressing herself against the warehouse wall, she rounded the corner, wasting no time on scouting, and froze in her tracks. Nearly a dozen children, boys and girls, were running around, laughing and playing in the damp alley. The stench of sewage wafted up through steaming grates as the children pushed and shoved. An older girl hung from a ladder, ascending to the warehouse roof, as another boy stood up on a crate, counting the children present. "We caught Lisa! She was actually in a crate!" a boy cried out, dragging the girl Fee had heard behind him with his friend. "That makes everyone! We win! We win!" The latter girl jeered, jumping to the floor as half the kids began dancing with glee. The boy on the crate put on a sour face. His team left out of the fun. "New game! New game!" they chanted. "Whose turn is it to pick? Morgan's? No way! She picked last week! Then it's my go! Sammy picked yesterday! It's mine!" a voice called out, silencing the rest. A girl, shorter than Fee, but clearly the eldest of the group, stood up on a crate for all to see. Her skin was darkest brown, a grey vest exposing her skinny arms to the sun. Her pants hovered at her ankles, over her flat shoes. Oddly, she wore a black veil wrapped around her face. A pair of shallow eyes peeked through the window. "The game will be follow the leader. If you can't keep up, you lose. If you get lost, you lose. If you chicken out, you lose," Fee chirped, unable to resist. Every eye turned to her. The children whispered to each other, the eldest ones in particular exchanging meaningful looks. The veiled girl stared Fee down, her eyes revealing nothing. "Do you want to play?" she asked. "No new kids," an older boy called out as a few others agreed. "What's the matter, Trent? Afraid you'll lose again?" the girl named Morgan teased, while the rest continued chatting in hushed tones. Fee decided to put an end to the whispers. "My name is Fee. I'm 14. No, I'm not from here," she addressed each of the children in turn. "You can try, but I might end up breaking your arm. And I'm more than happy to win your little game." The veiled girl cocked her head slightly, her curiosity hidden behind her blank expression. "Wonderful. I think we're ready then. If everyone's had a breather." She clapped her hands once, and the children all got up, ready to start. Fee squatted down, bouncing on her haunches. "Ready? Set? Go!" The veiled girl sprung from the crate and grabbed the hanging ladder. Scurrying up with remarkable speed, she pulled herself up and disappeared over the warehouse roof. The children scrambled to follow. Trent pushed others aside as he fought to be the first one climbing. The one called Sammy began climbing the ladder on the opposite warehouse, seemingly hoping to jump the gap once at the top. Fee watched them go, sizing up her competition. She broke out into a sprint down the alley to catch up, only to fall flat on her face. A young girl had stuck her leg out, giggling fiendishly as the other children burst into raucous laughter. Fee scowled, soaked from the foul puddle beneath her. Finding new resolve, she changed up her tactics, instead running up the side of the building itself. 3 steps, pivot, bound. She jumped to the opposite warehouse, building height. Back again she went, to the amazement of those below. Once more she rebounded, her powerful legs kicking off. Landing, she felt her grip weaken and bounded one last time, reaching out. Her hands grasped the ladder's rungs, now well above the rest of the children. With a small smirk, she hoisted herself onto the roof, coming face to face with the veiled girl. Their eyes met for a brief moment before the girl took off once again. Fee was caught off guard by her surprising speed. The other children, ascending fast, did not give her time to marvel. Without a look at her opponents below, Fee ran after the veiled girl. "A bull rush?" Peter asked, confused. "Yep. Captain Mathers and I have a mutual interest in taking out a particularly bothersome one along the Kendite Marsh," Baruka explained. Based on her previously resting figure, Peter could not understand how this imposing woman had appeared before him. She must have been nearly a foot taller than him and broader of shoulder to boot. Her thick muscles were matched only by her thicker braids, tied in large knots falling past her waist. Her tight clothing did little to hide her physique, her golden tan unappreciated in the dim light. The multiple necklaces she wore bore no jewels, but instead held all manner of tooth and claw from various presumably dead creatures. "And what's the envoy of a king doing cutting deals with a dirty smuggler?" Peter questioned. "King Aberon sent me to resolve the disturbance in Mairdale's trade route. The manner in which I do so is up to my discretion. I've gathered a small militia already. Mathis here lured me in with the promise of a mage." The gears began to turn. Peter sighed as he realized that this meeting was never about his favor. Still, a bulrush was hardly a cause for concern. We are talking about those tiny frog things, right? The creatures that gather at the edge of lakes and will happily nibble food right out of your hand?
Come now, Pete. You studied at that fancy-pants magic school of yours. Even I know the special characteristics of the bulrush.
Mathers interrupted. He had taken out the silver bird once again, unable to take his eyes off it. Peter massaged his temples, trying to ignore the buzzing in his ears. Biology was supposed to be his strong suit. The bulrush is aquatic by nature, he recited, trying to remember his texts. Known to forage inland in search of food and shelter from its many predators. Then it dawned on him. The bulrush has a rare genetic trait, uncommon in similar morphologies. Its growth suppressor gene has a unique mutation that causes it to promote rather than inhibit the synthesis of growth factor.
Bingo.
Mathers nodded. Veruca stared at Peter, unsure. I didn't understand a word of that. Does he get it or not? They don't stop growing, Peter concluded. But due to its wide array of predators and significant demand for sustenance, it's very rare to encounter one bigger than, say, a dog. He shot a wary glance from Veruca to Mathers as the two exchanged looks. How big are we talking? If the reports are to be believed, maybe the size of this room, Veruca answered. Peter blinked. You're kidding, right? That's not possible.
I thought so too, Mathers said. But the thing has completely shut down all travel through Kirtan's southern bridge. Trade caravans by the dozens have been torn to shreds, their drivers slaughtered. It's caused the area to be abandoned altogether.
Surely bandits are to blame, and not mythical creatures, Peter replied incredulous. I've seen the remains. No bandit could do that, Veruca said. But how is it allowed to grow so big?
Don't know, don't care. All that matters is that it's real, Pete. I believe it and you believe me. So let's cut to the meat here. You want passage? I want the beast slain. We got a deal?
What's your angle? Surely you don't care about Meridell's economic well-being? Or is this a hitherto unheard-of act of community service from the great Captain Mathers? Peter questioned.
The bulrush has interfered with my dealings, sure. But opportunity often hides under the veil of misfortune. The beast has caused Kirtan's southern checkpoint to be abandoned completely. If the creature were to suddenly fall dead, well, my, special caravans would be able to pass through that window of opportunity unhampered.
Mathers grinned. I refuse, Peter said abruptly, standing to leave. Assuming your tale is true, I have no interest in risking my neck for your illegal escapades. We're settled. You can be satisfied with that alone. I'll find my own way across the strait. Veruca stepped aside as Peter strode to the door. He stumbled slightly as the boat dipped, grasping the handle for support.
Shame.
Mathers' low voice filled the silent room.
Without you, I'm afraid we'll have to turn to more manageable game. Perhaps we should put rabbit on the menu.
Peter froze. Blood rushed to his face as he struggled to process what he heard.
Odd company you now keep, eh, Pete?
Mathers pressed on.
And to think you're happy to deride me for my illegal dealings.
Peter was back at the desk, slamming his hands down hard. You leave Fee out of this, he hissed.
You've named it.
Mathers' grin widened.
Come now, Pete. You know that'll only make it harder when it's put down.
Peter lunged over the desk and grabbed Captain Mathers by the collar, upending his chair and slamming him against the wall. Veruca shouted out in alarm, but he didn't care. Teeth clenched, knuckles white, Peter was blind to his rage. Blind, too, to the knife Mathers had at his gut.
Seems you've had one too many. Let's settle down.
Mathers' tone was calm, but icy cold.
Deal with my beast, and I won't have to deal with yours.
Fee dove without hesitation. Falling 20 feet through the air, she was caught by a steep awning and slid down fast, landing lightly on the floor. The veiled girl had disappeared into the crowd of bustling workers. Fee had followed her along the rooftops, one step behind at every turn. Despite her short stature, the girl's feet worked furiously, taking twice as many steps, just able to keep ahead of Fee. After a misjudged leap, the veiled girl stumbled, and Fee capitalized by pouncing forward, closing the gap, only to have her roll over the side of the rooftop and disappear from view. Now on the ground, Fee alertly scanned the wharf for signs of her prey. The other children had descended the buildings at their own pace and were now running through the masses, searching. Moreover, the kids who had feared the height of the warehouse and remained in the alley had poked their heads out and joined the chase as well. Fee gritted her teeth. Losing focus now meant certain defeat. To hell with it, she thought, pulling her hood down and perking her ears up to allow them full range. Focusing on footsteps, Fee mentally crossed off the heavy sailors with their wagons, as well as the soft taps of the other children mixed in with the rest. Silent she stood. And then she heard it. A flurry of footsteps was heading in the direction of the Lucky Pure. Fee took off, darting past the sailors on her way. Morgan, a step behind, noticed her decisive pursuit and called out to her companions to follow. The surrounding men berated them as two boys upended a cart, sending round, colorful fruits tumbling in every direction. The children congregated at the edge of the pier to see the veiled girl waving at them from aboard the vessel. Fee stared in awe at her ability to skirt the winding line of passengers and evade the crewmen. "Let's go, boys!" Trent yelled, opting for the brute force approach. Fee hurriedly followed, as his group shoved their way through the crowd. A portly gentleman toppled over, sending a mighty ripple through the line. The cascade sent a woman at the far end over the edge, plunging into the murky depths as the boisterous jeering cut through the masses and began boarding the ship. The white-clad attendants yelled for them to stop, but they were helpless against the horde of children that had overrun their vessel. Fee peered over to where the veiled girl had been, but she had disappeared once again. Boys and girls ran in every direction, hooting and hollering as the ship's crew chased after them. Fee ran swiftly around the deck, betting the veiled girl had fled to the opposite side of the ship. She groaned as she saw her thought process was shared by others as well. 5 pairs of eyes scanned the far deck for any signs of the girl, when a crash came from the upper level. A shadow flew through the air, landing on the ship's railing amidst them all. The veiled girl squatted, perched atop the rail, admiring those that had managed to make it this far, before once again leaping over the side. Fee rushed to the edge with the rest of the children to see where she had fallen. A lump formed in her throat. There, docked in the shadows of the Lucky Pure, sat Captain Mathers's ship. The crewmen chasing them had rounded the corner at the orders of those shouting from the upper deck. Sammy had gotten caught up there and was screaming and biting as the men did their best to hold him down. Gripped with fear and excitement, the kids argued over how best to make the jump as the crewmen approached. With Morgan taking the lead, they hopped over the railing just as the sailors arrived. Fee had no choice. She jumped as well. Grabbing at a mast pole for a fleeting moment, Fee dropped down, using the canvas sail to slow her fall. Alighting on the ship's black deck, Fee watched as children rained down around her. Morgan fell gracefully, the rest with loud thuds. Trent massaged his elbow as he argued with his friends where to search next, insisting they should go below deck. A sinking feeling formed in the pit of Fee's stomach as she turned to the captain's quarters. Almost camouflaged against the caravel's backdrop, the veiled girl stood silently at the door, with an ear pressed against it. "What are you doing?" Fee whispered. The girl caught Fee's eye, revealing a small gray ball in her hand, and opened the door. Scanning the room, she took in the scene before her. The warrior woman stood against the far wall, well out of her way. The captain stood in front of his desk, shaking hands with an unknown man. The young man's contempt threatened violence as the captain's satisfied smirk held him at bay. They too could be easily avoided. Finally, her sight fell to the captain's desk, and she quickly identified the third drawer on the left, just as the captain noticed the intruder in his cabin. Committing the room's layout to memory, she threw down the ball. With a sharp crack, the powder within spewed across the floor. The wind behind her instantly kicked it up, and a billowing cloud of smoke arose, engulfing the room. Blind, the veiled girl stepped deftly and crouched down behind the desk. The adult's coughs could be heard through the smoke as she stuck an awl into the drawer's keyhole and slammed its back with her palm. With the lock smashed, she slid the drawer open and removed the documents within. Stuffing them beneath her vest, she got up and dashed back towards the open doorway.
"Grab that wretch!"
the captain roared. The smoke had spread out to flood the deck as well. The veiled girl burst through the doorway under hot pursuit, to the confused looks of the other children. She ran right by them as the adults bore down on them all. The warrior woman grabbed Trent and held him to the ground. Captain Mathers himself pinned Morgan to a wall as the remaining kids scattered desperately. But the veiled girl was fastest to fall. Past the gangplank and halfway down the pier, she had already escaped. She walked along the narrow beach, far away from Mathers' wrath. The wharf had given way to the sand here, where the ships were few and far between. Feeling safe, the girl removed her black veil, revealing her shaven bald head. Dipping down to the water's edge, she splashed her face, enjoying the refreshment as the tide crawled away for the day. Standing up, she flipped her veil in her hands, twisting the fabric to don a makeshift bandana instead. She withdrew the documents at her chest and looked over her reward, aware of the soft footsteps behind her. "You planned all this?" Fee asked. "Naturally," the girl said without turning from the sea. "And the others?" "Use the resources available, rather than your own, to avoid suspicion," the girl recited. She turned to look at Fee and was briefly captivated by her long ears. "Ah, so you're a chimera. That explains it. Your parents committed quite the sin." "Don't speak of my parents," Fee said. "Pay it no mind. I have no love for my parents either," she said. "You grew up alone. I can tell. You have the same eyes as me." Fee bristled with defiance. Her brilliant blue pierced the sullen gray. "My eyes are nothing like yours." "No?" The girl approached, the calm waves lapping at her ankles, until she was face to face with Fee, returning a newfound look of intensity. "Tell me where I go wrong. I see in them no room for trust. Even now, you're admonishing yourself for letting me come so close. You've spent many nights alone, fighting back sleep, wary of the terrors that prowl the night, but far more frightened of the ones that haunt your dreams. You've seen horrific things, things that left searing imprints beneath your eyelids that you cannot erase, try and try as you might. And you've run out of tears. Sparkle though they might, those eyes haven't wet your cheeks in a long, long time." The girl waited patiently for a rebuttal, a knowing smirk across her face. "I'm the same as you, Fee. The covers may be different, but the pages inside tell the same story. I fed myself, clothed myself, even chose a name for myself." The girl's eyes grew soft. "Would you like to know what it is?" "I'm sure you'll tell me," Fee muttered. For one wrapped in mystery, she sure did talk a lot. The girl took no offense. "My name is Ashara. It means that which God left behind. Apt, no?" Fee stood silently, mad at herself for being read like an open book. The girl had seen right through her, so easily exploring places she had locked away from the rest of the world. Worse still, she had no idea what was hidden behind those sunken eyes. She did not know how to judge this girl's intentions. "Come with me, Fee," Ashara said. "My group cares not what you are or from whence you came. They'll give you a place and purpose, a home where the world's hatred cannot reach you." Fee's thoughts turned inward, to a time when she would have happily accepted such a request, a time when she was still alone. "I'm sorry, Ashara. You might be right. Maybe I am like you. I was lost and alone once, but not anymore. I have those things now." The girl smiled sadly. "Then do all you can to hold on to them." She turned her back as the water pulled at her heels. "This is farewell, Fee. It was fun playing with you, my friend. It would be a shame if this was the only time our paths did cross." Ashara continued along the shore, leaving Fee alone to stare across the sea. Thanks for listening. A new chapter will be made available for free each week until the 10-chapter volume is finished. Or, if you're excited to read more, you can purchase the complete audiobook over at Audible right now, or the full ebook from Amazon, Kobo, and more. You could also support me via a direct donation at paypal.me/peterandfee. or most importantly, by subscribing to my Patreon over at patreon.com/peterandfee. My patrons will receive both the full ebook and audiobook on day one of their release, as well as exclusive behind-the-scenes insight episodes I create for each chapter. Furthermore, they will get first access to all my content and many other perks exclusive to them. I produce Peter and Fee entirely independently, so I would really appreciate your support in whichever way you prefer. If not, no worries. Please continue to enjoy the adventures, and hopefully, I'll be able to keep creating them for you. Next time, Chapter 3, Battle with the Bulrush. Available now.